Yeah. Oh, we're running? Okay. Good evening. Tonight is our last session for the semester of our course, The President, the Press, and Democratic Society. And we're finishing up in fine form with Stephen Crowley of the New York Times, a Pulitzer Prize-winning photographer who has covered the White House. And he's also done a lot of other work that he's going to show us some of the variety of his work and how he got into photography. So he's got a lot of pictures with him. And Stephen, where do you want to begin?
Well, I do have a lot of pictures, and if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask them as we go along. And if I were showing strictly the stuff I was doing at the White House over the years, it would get pretty boring, so I threw in a few other things that I had here. So, I've been at the New York Times for 14 years. I've been in Washington for 20 years. I came during the Reagan administration, but came from a family that was very interested in politics. And I have two brothers who work at the Palm Beach Post, which and one's a political editor, the other one's an illustrator, used to be a political cartoonist. And so I started there as a lab tech in 1978, and my first political picture, can you guys see it on the screen here? Can you guys see it?
Yeah, if we don't see it, they don't see it. Is it on there?
Yeah.
Can't see. We do not see. There we go. There we go.
Okay, now I can hear you too. Is everybody awake? I teach too now. I know how it is. I'll try to make it interesting. Did anybody hear what I said before? Okay, good. All right, anyway, so this is the first published picture I had of a politician, of a president, while I was working as a lab tech at the Palm Beach Post-Times, and I was so proud. It was the last edition that was coming out, and they sent the real photographers out to shoot the color pictures, which was a real novelty at the time, and nobody wanted to leave early to service the last edition, which was like 500 copies. So they were going to let the lab tech, Stephen Crowley, go back and have his first picture on the front page. I was excited because I really wanted my 8th grade civic teacher to see it. And so there it was, and I waited. It's in my apron, and they came out and handed me a stack of papers, and there it was, my first picture by Stanley Crowley. So anyway.
So they put Stanley?
So, yeah, that was it. Anyway. And this screen looks a little stretched. These pictures actually look a little warped. But anyway, that's Richard Nixon post-Watergate, obviously, after one of his rare public appearances in Palm Beach. And when I came, I first worked at the Washington Times, and I drew straws and got the newspaper pool position in the White House on Reagan's last day. So they brought in a group of about 10 of us to capture the last few moments when he said goodbye to everybody. And I just love this picture because you could see the dust on his desk and his little broken finger and all that. And that was the last time he stood behind his desk as President of the United States.
How did you find him as far as photography was concerned? Could you see the life in him when he was on camera?
Pretty much, yeah. He was terrific. I mean, there wasn't much access, but he knew how to react to a camera, and he had a good press office that did their best to help photographers get what they needed. So, and things tightened up a little bit with George Bush, and this was a surprise. It was his OMB director showing up in a gorilla suit, and the whole press corps was out there, and poor guy walked. The gorilla stopped short, and Bush got tangled up in his balloons there. So, happy birthday. And this is one of my favorite pictures. This was after the election, the transition period. And it was Bill Clinton's, the first time he met with George Bush. He came from Little Rock. We flew in on the plane, and he came in on the South Lawn, and this was the first time they faced each other after the election. Just a shot made early in the Clinton administration. And this is one of my favorites. This was Clinton was making a speech at an elementary school, and they were hustling the pool out, and I saw the no parking.
Yeah, for the king. That's nice. That's very nice. Oh yeah, he's gonna put it up bigger. Yeah. Oh, good.
Right. This was the day that the president was impeached, and he came out to finally apologize to the nation. Do you remember that? Were you there?
Yes. Yes, I do remember it. Yeah.
of his better moments with his budget people.
Uh-huh.
He loved that picture. He asked for 10 copies of it. This is my favorite of him, and Clinton also asked for this picture, but he signed one for me. He said, I really wasn't that depressed.
Sometimes pictures can give a different sense, like the picture of Kennedy standing over his desk.
Job by George Tames in the New York Times. Right?
He was reading the New York Times.
Is that what he was doing?
Yeah,
Well,
he was
George
reading.
never admitted to that. But
Huh?
No, George never admitted to that. But,
That's
right.
what he was doing, looking down at the table
Well,
as
that's
he had
first
the
I heard
paper.
that Kennedy was a subscriber, so that's good news.
Yeah, well, he quit the Herald Tribune.
Yeah, this is the president in his first trip to this was in St. Petersburg, his first trip to Europe, and when he looked and saw Putin's soul, and this is
They seem to be coordinated.
right. Yeah. And this is last year when he was looking back into his soul again. So,
Not quite as happy.
right.
Yeah.
So I think this was, I forgot whose funeral this was. This was recent. When was it?
Was it Reagan's funeral?
I think it was.
Yeah.
The service for Reagan, you're right. That's
Yeah.
what it was. Okay, and that ends that. So this is. So then I also have covered all the campaigns since, well, frankly, since Reagan. I've been involved in them. I spent almost an entire year out with George Bush. So here's just a few frames from different campaigns. Any questions so far? We can't see anybody on the screen anymore. Can't
Yeah,
hear you either.
if you all have questions, then shout them out, because we're looking at the monitor with all the pictures, and we don't see you all.
Sure they can even hear?
Can you hear us?
Do you have any questions?
Not so far. Maybe later.
Okay.
Is that
We didn't know
the
it.
pictures?
Yeah. So if you all have any questions, just call them out, because when the pictures go up, we don't see you all.
We
'Cause
don't
it's-
hear you either. So.
Yeah, it turns out we didn't hear you, so we didn't know if you had any questions.
Any questions before we go on?
Just a question. Were you guys able to see all the pictures and hear what he was saying?
Yes.
Okay. 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 So a few from the campaigns.
Now, do you find that it's difficult to shoot pictures that are somewhat different, because the White House is always trying to herd you in particular areas?
Right. Well, obviously the White House and the campaign press people are trying to get you to take the picture they want, the picture of the day, and they go overboard. They're a little overzealous at times, but we do our best. At least, I mean, if it's a big crowd, we'll show a big crowd. If it's a small crowd, they're trying to put you in a position. They'll deliberately lay it out to make it look like it's bigger than it is. We're not. We'll try to work around that. At least try to get a sense of where the candidate is. And then something like this, when Kennedy opened up his campaign headquarters in the driving school, and the next day all that disappeared.
Yeah.
They covered up everything. That was an unfortunate.
Yeah.
And this was on the Dole. Now that was another thing. Dole was he was a terrific majority leader. I think you would agree with that. Terrible on the campaign trail, only because his handlers were so afraid that he'd say the wrong thing or get angry, which he was not. That you couldn't get near him. You never got near Bob Dole, which was really unfortunate, because I think he probably would have fared a little bit better had the real Bob Dole been out there. Were you out on that campaign?
No. No.
And this was the I'm all
I don't
ears.
think anything would have saved it, though.
Well, I'm just saying it. He may have had more
They had
commercial
visits to
endorsements.
cemeteries, to senior citizens' homes, and all sorts of things.
Right, and actually, Joe Lelyveld didn't want to run that picture with the wings. He thought that would have been unfair. And they actually thought this was unfair too. This was when people were making fun of Perot's ears. So I'm all ears, but And this was the friendly George Bush as we were out boarding a plane once, serving us all drinks. He was a very funny guy, and you could get pretty close. The access during his campaign was terrific, and you really get a sense of the guy. This was after he lost in New Hampshire, and he went to Bob Jones University, and instead of going tight, I just love the hearts and the moment there.
Oh, yeah. That is nice. Do you find that that candidates who are running from outside, not as an incumbent, are much easier to get to generally?
Yeah, oh, definitely. I mean, the George Bush last year compared to the George Bush 4 years ago, it was night and day access. I mean, they had it so tightly controlled. He always looked like Caesar entering Rome in every picture. That's what they would, put the photographers in such a place, and it was the same thing, reaching across to these crowds. You saw very little of the things that frankly made him look good in the beginning. I mean, that he was more involved with writing his speeches and definitely more in charge than he was getting credit for. I remember we were saying how stupid he was. He was actually, far more involved in his campaign and that than now you can't get near him. This was Al Gore during his campaign. He was giving us a tour around the hotel where he grew up in Washington. So he was looking into a little area where he used to hide his toys. And I thought the Hitchcock effect worked at that point in the campaign. But this is my favorite picture from the campaign. It's not terribly artistic, but they were taking in for some reason they brought us in the governor's mansion for about 15 minutes and let about 4 photographers hang around and take pictures while they were calling all the precincts, precinct by precinct in Florida, trying to get the vote count and try to get out there. So this was just the beginning of that whole period there.
Looks like the father is the most worried.
Right, and Barbara Bush was just pacing in and out of the room, just back and forth. And Jeb was reading from some poll numbers. Behind him was Karen Hughes, also on the phone. That's Karen Hughes' son.
His son, yeah.
This is Joe Lieberman at one of his house parties, right there with the mojo.
Yeah, and the light. It's nothing like having a halo.
This was one where I skirted the John Kerry campaign, which I also spent an entire year on. And the best part is you get to see this wonderful country we live in, but you saw very little of John Kerry. And out of utter desperation of trying to make a different picture, at the last moment, there was 2 stages, and I figured he'd climb across. And so at the last moment, I slid past the Secret Service and laid flat on my back, and just as he crossed over, he saw something out of the corner of his eye, and he turned around and pointed at me. Now, we didn't run it because it was because, obviously the photographer's not the story, but I like the picture.
Yeah.
And this this is what happens when you lose. This is at the Democratic National Committee headquarters here in Washington. I was there, and through the ballroom you see Clinton and Roosevelt and all the big names, and poor Adlai Stevenson, who lost Eisenhower, is in the coat closet. So.
With bars across it.
Right.
Maybe that was because he's from Illinois.
Right. So that's it. Any questions on that?
When you're on these campaigns, do you see any trends as you're taking the pictures, as far as access, say John Kerry to George Bush? Did you see any trends as you were there that maybe you might think that one candidate was going to win and one wasn't, and while you were actually sort of involved in the process?
Well, I don't know that it's a trend. I mean, I would say Bob Dole and John Kerry, their campaign, they were so tight that you could never really get a sense. I mean, there was at one point that John Kerry didn't come to the back of his plane for 6 weeks, and the reporters were keeping a calendar. You were out on that, and it was so. The trend is, if there is a trend, it's just you've got these people trying to stage manage every event to fare thee well, and so. And the photographers will try to work around that. I mean, we're not there to work as public relations people for them. We're trying to get a sense of what the crowds are, what kind of crowds you're getting, and how they're acting toward you, and hopefully trying to dissect the candidate, show you a little bit other than John Kerry can go windsurfing. And for 3 days in a row, they took us out on boats to get this windsurfing picture that came back to haunt them. And I don't believe we ever ran it. It was just so staged. At the end, they were yelling, "Did you get it?" And by the 3rd day, he was
we could practically reach out and smack him as he was going by. They were so desperate to get this image of him out there. So that's the trend. The trend is to, is not to allow you to find out what the candidate is about, but what they want you to know about them. So just a few on security here. This is at Reagan's funeral here, and it's just it's how sad. When I first came to Washington, the Capitol was like City Hall, and I was so proud of that you could walk in and out, and it was the people's town hall, and now it's turned to this. And on the campaign, this is Secret Service at an elementary school, George Bush protecting, because you never know what an angry 6-year-old will do. And this is Kerry talking to Nagin in New Orleans, and you can't even touch the candidate. You can see the Secret Service removing the hand off of his back from an overzealous. And then this is one of these. So this was George Bush addressing a crowd at a stadium, and again, I mean, I just drifted away up past Secret Service and security to get up to this far up because this looked so ridiculous to me, and because this definitely wasn't the picture they wanted. They had a giant flag behind him and a giant crowd on either side of the flag, so that's the backdrop they wanted, but this was the absurd amount of security they have these days.
Where was that?
That was in Tampa, Florida. I think that's my last security. That's at the White House. You can actually move around a little bit more. Anyway. So that's it on security. Any questions on security?
Which administration has given you the most access?
I'd like to say they're all terrible, but they are all terrible. And in the beginning, they're a little looser until they figure out that they don't have to give you access, and then things tighten up. George Bush's first 96 days were terrific, and I think that's partly because they were familiar with me because I'd been out with them for so long, and then, I don't know, maybe the paper boy threw the Times in the puddle one time's too many when they were delivering, but I think their access is extremely tight these days, and the best was Gerald Ford, and I think it's because they had a photographer, David Hume Kennerly, who had won a Pulitzer for his work in Vietnam. He's a very well-known photojournalist. He lives in California, and he would help the photographers get access. Nowadays, most administrations, you generally have some pretty young people who don't know anything about photography, and their job is just to keep you behind a velvet rope, and that's it. So I can't really say that since Ford that anyone really stands out. So.
Do they try to use their own photographs, that they're really interested in getting you to use theirs?
Well, in particular, there was an Associated Press photographer who was on the campaign with us, who later joined the Bush administration. They hired a picture editor, and they simply started doing their own handouts, and a lot of news organizations were using them. The New York Times put a stop to it about 2 years ago, said that's it. I mean, they would just assume control every image that was going out. And and I don't think we're really paying enough attention to that. And still, there's most of the pictures you see of George Bush and a lot of the magazines and overseas are White House handouts. So, and then hopefully magazines, and then we'll put an end to using them. Now we'll use them if it's like a look back, a historical thing, or an investigation. But we're not going for the handouts anymore. So.
Because they have, over the years, they really have been very successful in getting their pictures.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's the technology makes it very easy for them, and it's outrageous.
Because they have not had the same kind of control over print that they've had over photographs.
Yeah.
And like in special times, like I know it's even the Ford administration during the Mayaguez crisis, they had Kennerly in there taking the pictures, and so everything released was just just his stuff. Yeah. But that's that's usual.
Yeah, I mean, you can understand if it's a national security thing, you can, right? But this is, you meet with the top-selling Girl Scout cookie saleswoman, and they still won't let you in for a picture of that size. But this was the one day in the life of George Bush
it was his 96th day, and so they allowed me 1 day with him, and this is at 7 a.m. in the morning. You can see the light on up in the residence there. And this is during his national security briefing where he meets with the head of CIA and his national security advisor and that. And obviously they're not going to allow me in there, but that was his personal aide who keeps him on time, peeking in, watching the meeting as it goes on. So this is meeting with the senator. It's at 9:35 in the morning, as you can see. I can't quite read his speed dialer there. I never could, but. And here he's arguing with John King at CNN before they went on the air. It was all very much comedy afterwards, but that was right before he was still getting mic'd up for it.
Was that over China?
It was
And
over
the-
China, yeah.
yeah,
It was over
the
China. Well, you
planes.
have a good memory.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is with Ari Fleischer, and he spent half his day out on the road, so he was leaving after about, I had this just, it was like over 20 meetings at that point. It was about 11:30 in the morning.
He looked a little tired.
Right. And this is landing in Louisiana. Tax relief rally. Behind you, somebody was complaining about the amount of taxes he was paying, and Bush reached over and slapped him and says, "You're telling Noah about the flood." And this is him in his private quarters in the Air Force One, reading Sports Illustrated. And at the dinner that night for a fundraiser in Arkansas. And then on to Crawford, Texas. He just wanted to get out of there, and he went to Crawford, and that's where I dropped out. So, any questions on that?
Have you made any lasting relationships with any of the presidents that you've covered?
No, I would say no. I never even got a nickname with Bush, but if and that's okay. But I don't think I've made any lasting enemies either, except maybe one candidate. But I try to keep a respectful arm's length away from everybody, no matter what my politics, my personal feelings are. I try to treat everybody as fairly and cover them as accurately as I can. And I think that most of the people I work with sort of get that sense, and so that's helped me get some access in that. But but lasting, no. I mean, no, I haven't. So. On the Kerry campaign, since I couldn't get near him, and we were about 6 buses back, and mind you, we're paying like $2,000 a day it costs just to have little Stanley Crowley out there. So, so I did an essay on what the candidates weren't seeing, and or what they were seeing from the bus, but the people they didn't engage in, because you don't dare take a risk anymore. You go from your bus, and you can wave safely from there. You get to a rally, and it's a hand-picked crowd for the most part, or at least it's the local Democratic club or whatever. So this is what I shot out the windows, and I love the way the plastic bags were mimicking the dresses here. So,
Yeah.
so it was the Believe in America
Right.
tour, and and this was Las Vegas, where you had this billboard where you could learn to gamble, and then people who to save a few dollars living under those energy lines outside of Denver. All these ran as diptychs. They ran a page of these as diptychs. This flip-flop in Ohio, scary country. And my rule was it had to be from the window of the bus. I couldn't get out, or that would break the thing. So this was a wedding, obviously, and on the left there is a wedding chapel in Las Vegas. So, I always wonder, well, how am I going to pair these up? And I'm just piecing this together as going along. And she's holding a monkey in her arms, which you have to run it pretty big to see. But historians will wonder, But the American dream there in Ohio.
Yeah.
Some more street stuff, just as they're zipping by. And this only because you'd have to be pretty old to get this one, but there's a barber shop, and on the right is Perry Como, and Perry Como started as a barber shop, and that's he's singing into a microphone, but he was actually started as a barber, so in Pennsylvania. So, all right, so then when I'm not, I try to work on my little art projects as I go along, so I've for years I've worked on my Washington Monument. Obviously, we all know this isn't actually the Washington Monument, but so this is called Eyes Waiting.
Yeah.
This is called History Repeating Itself. We actually ran this one, Al Siegel liked it, but that's a terrible
That's it.
print. I apologize for that.
That was interesting, yeah.
That's just,
Yeah.
despite my allergies, I made that picture. That's a terrible print, too. I'm sorry.
God, that's terrific. How did you get interested in doing the Washington Monument?
Well, again, I grew up in a small town. We didn't have a lot to, we had to. I'm easily amused, so I mean, I grew up in a small town in Florida, so to come up to the big city, and I was really, that's always an advantage, I guess, to be curious. And this was a trip to Cuba a few years ago, and I was trying to work with diptychs and themes as we were going through, but the whole thing, like in Fingen's Wake, it's like in this dream state. It's not awake and it's not asleep, and it's the whole sense you get when you're there. People are just waiting for something to happen. So,
What year was
waiting
it?
for it. This was about 5 years ago. So, and Florida, this looked like Florida back when I was a kid in the big city. In Miami, the buildings and the air, the sky. This is a cockfighter. They're waiting for the father to come back because it's cockfighting rooster. We didn't have those in my town, but
Do you like black and white over color?
I love black and white. I love film. I love a dark room. I love the magic of still watching the print come up and the developer and not behind the electronic camera. The image coming up in that little screen is not quite the same to me. I do all my own printing and I love it, and I miss it. I miss doing it every day, but I guess this digital thing isn't the fad I thought it was. So. It's a fascinating place, Cuba, if you ever get the chance to go down there. So, and that's the end of it there.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Actually, there was somebody at our, a professor in our department who took a lot of trips to Cuba and took students to Cuba.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Anybody been to Cuba there in that class? No?
No.
Okay. Martha's going to take you. So, all right. So, and this is another thing: is what I see in my night terrors. This is actually a building reflected in another building. But if you kind of let the glass bend it and all that, you can create little shapes. So, this is Cool Kitty singing a ditty, which is the only title I could come up with. And this is, you can see that's at the White House. You can see the little Speedy Gonzales and this is my father. I used to have we were so poor. We lived in Jersey City. I was in a basement apartment. There was 5 of us in one bedroom, and I used to have this terrible nightmare of this robot crossing the sky, and every time he would take a step, it would go caw, caw. And I had this dream over and over again until I woke up one night and realized it was my father snoring, and I never had the dream again. So this is a tribute to my father here. This is a skylight in New York City. So. That's just this was from a series I called 10-Minute Gargoyles, things that just come up until the light and shadows change, and so this is called The Flirt. Now, can you see Every Man Loves a Woman in Uniform is the other name I had for it, the woman on the left. We have one person in the audience here that sees it. Thank you. It's very generous of you. And this is in between the rotunda, and the only time I've ever been up in the rotunda, and I saw this face staring out at me. So. And this is Lincoln, who comes out at 10 a.m. every morning at the Union Station, and this is this robot with pigeons making fun of it. So that's on the
Yeah, that's right. Doesn't
Russian
seem to be
embassy.
doing its job, does it?
This is a woman I used to date. It's a joke. Okay, and this is what. Okay, that's a long story. I'll tell you some other time. And a few shots. Any questions on that? Okay.
What about this one?
And this is from a few shots from overseas. I was with Nick Kristoff. We were doing Joe Levo was the editor. We were doing something on the future of Africa, and this was in the Congo. We came across this famine. These are the Interahamwe from Rwanda, from the massacre in Rwanda.
What year was it?
97. And this was, we were crossing the Congo on a barge, and this guy just kept staring at me. This was a truck light that was on the, I just kept, anyway, he just kept staring at me. He had the Hutu eyes, I call it. This little Palestinian kid showing off his scar, very proud of it. This is from Kosovo. More Kosovo. This were some Serbs. The cave are. There were some torture victims, some Serbian torture victims, and this is the victorious. You know what's happening there. Now this is a few things from the war. This is a war plan they were doing in Kuwait. I just like because the truck came over. It looks like it knocked the sign over. It was just a little visual joke. Okay. This was in Pakistan. It was just, I was on a balcony where I thought it was safer, and they were beheading Tony Blair, which they spelled his name wrong. I do remember that. And it was just dumb luck that somebody walked by with the poster of bin Laden. It was just the only frame I had. So anyway, they didn't mean to get the blood all over themselves, but that was an accident. But it was.
In that kind of situation, are you worried about being in that kind of situation?
No, I mean, you know, if you ever look at most of these rallies, if you ever look, the first 12 rows are really angry, and the other 200 rows behind them are all picnicking and eating. So it's not really, you know, that's why I let the guys kind of smiling. It's most people will, first they'll threaten to behead you, then they'll offer you lunch. You know, so I mean, people are very friendly in Pakistan for the most part. And
I guess it's getting from one to the other. That's the trick.
This is not advancing something really here. All right, well, this isn't advancing, right? The exciting Afghani stuff. But.
Oh, yeah, we must.
All right, we're going to have to retool here, so talk to Martha while I figure.
What questions do you all have?
Have there been any really historical moments that you've never captured on film that you witnessed?
That I didn't capture on film?
Yeah, that you were right there and you witnessed?
I don't think so. Not yet. Of course, that's always one's worry. But no, I don't think I've missed anything yet that was terribly historic. There was a few arty pictures I missed that haunt me to this day, but nothing. You know, the problem is there's little access to anything these days. But you know, something that I was there and I missed. No, not yet.
Do you find that sometimes you're taking pictures and only when you come back and start looking at them do you know what you got?
Well, I think in the days of film, that was it. I mean, it was an entirely different experience. You know, you had a sense. You more often hoped you had it. You know, nowadays with digital, you just look, you either have it or you don't. You just keep shooting. So, you know, so it's not quite as.
What are the advantages of digital?
Well, the obvious advantages are speed, but the disadvantage, I think, is just the way you engage in making the picture. You know, it's kind of like digital's like walking a tightrope with a big net underneath. You know, if you can wave to your friends and bounce up and down and make the crowd go, oh, but you know, if you fall, the net's there, and that's the computer, that's Photoshop. And I think, you know, it saves everything. You can sharpen it, save the color, make it any color you want, to where it's almost a problem in some quarters because you wonder what to believe anymore. With film, you either had it or you didn't, and you're on that tightrope and you're using all your senses. And so the whole experience of how you approach things, I think you're much more aware and you're much more in tune of what's going on because you have to be. You know, you have to pay attention. So I think I did better work with film, and I just do more work now with digital. But that's it.
Do you find that you increasingly get used to it? Or you increasingly miss black and white film?
Well, I mean, it's I have no choice but to get used to it because that's what the New York Times wants to use. But
Have the cameras gotten better? I mean, the resolution's gotten
I mean, the camera. Look, I mean, I think you can start with a picture of Bush and make it Shrek. At this point, I mean, you know, you can do anything with computers. So, I mean, that's the point. You know, it's. You know, at what point is, you know, too much, so. Okay, now, without having to go through all this stuff again.
marked masks, how important are kind of aesthetic concerns versus narrative or,
I think they've always been equally as important. So it's just that I think there's so many pictures out there, and you know, it's lost some of its uniqueness for sure. But you know, it's still, you have to know how to tell a story, and you still have to get the experience. Well, there's that. Plus, just you know, how to cover a football game. Anybody can get out there, even me, and I'm terrible at sports or have no interest in it. But you know, a broken watch is right twice a day, and I can make a decent picture. And if you send me out there with, here we go again with this thing here.
Okay.
So, anyway, well, you know what? I think I'll spare you all the rest since it's.
Oh, can't we do your Afghanistan? Come on.
Wait, oh, I'd be happy to show it.
Yeah.
It's.
Oh, yeah, we've got lots of time. No, we'd love to see them.
Yeah, but how to get there from here, I don't know. All right, let me see if I can try something different here. I know I can do. It'll take me a minute. So this is why computers are just a fad. They never work right when you need them.
What are the differences between George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush as far as their response to a camera?
You know, I think most politicians are so used to having cameras around that they put up with it. I would say there's really no difference. George Bush, 43, was just fine around camera. I don't think anybody likes to have cameras around them, but they know it's part of the job. So they were pretty much the same. The access was the same. We all pretty much start complaining around this point in their administration, but it's all pretty much the same. So.
Lincoln seemed to love to be photographed.
It's true. He didn't have to sit as many times, I guess, but
Yeah.
and it was black and white. And everybody likes to pose for that. So being digital, nothing.
And it was Matthew Brady.
Yeah.
So decided he would do it.
I just have a few things from Afghanistan. I thought everybody would be. So I went to Afghanistan with Tim Weiner and Met and with there was a bunch of us there. But we wound up in Jalalabad. We went there the morning after bin Laden left Jalalabad. A bunch of us went. Finally got across the border from Pakistan. We've been trying for weeks, and. The gift shops weren't open. It was definitely okay. So we just everybody was racing to Kabul, and in fact, 3 of the journalists with us, I don't know if you remember hearing about that, Pam Cosgrove was there, 3 of the journalists darted across there and they were murdered. There was 2 attacks. Yeah. They were with our group. We had decided to stay just because we had so many people in Kabul. That we would work that region. It was 22 miles away from Tora Bora, which was at that point kind of this mythical place. So we worked that area, and let's see if I can get past this. So this is the Marines on one of the aircraft carriers playing the game of Risk, and I just twinned this with this because this was the villagers up near Tora Bora, and the U.S. had started pounding. You know, Jalalabad, they were dropping bombs there, and then there was this road up there, and it's, with a couple of villages. This is where bin Laden and Al Qaeda were hiding out. These village elders came down and to complain that they saw us and decided to tell us like we could do something about it, and they drew a map of Tora Bora on his hand. That's what that is. So.
And what was he telling you of what was where?
Well,
I remember seeing that.
Yeah. Well, this was. Remember, there was that 24-hour ceasefire. And at 8 a.m., this is when they believe now, if you've read Jawbreaker and that when bin Laden got away and we were sold out by the Eastern Shore. And this was a B-57 as contrail. Just that's the moment that it broke, and they just started pounding Tora Bora again. So these were just
went on for
is
days. When we finally got up there, we'd go up there every day and just sit there and watch them drop bombs and just move up to the front line with them. This is me getting knocked over from that tank, but and some of the, I don't know whether this guy was Al-Qaeda or what. You all of a sudden just people would show up, bloody messes, and I believe that these were Al-Qaeda fighters. This is,
Yeah.
it was in a refugee camp.
Yeah.
These were captured Al-Qaeda fighters. I got in there for about a minute, long enough to walk down and give them time to hurl invectives and walk out. These are some more dead fighters.
In the ones, the Al-Qaeda fighters, were those people held by the U.S.?
No, they were not. We never saw a soldier. We saw planes. We never once saw any special forces. We were just a bunch of, we were just there. You know, there was no local police force or anything. We were, we were with the Eastern Shore supposedly, but we would just sort of drift around, and the most protection we had were the leftover bodyguards that Geraldo Rivera had when he showed up. So this is the scorched earth after they dropped the Daisy Cutter and up there in Tora Bora. So I just like this as an ender because it's a brick factory, and this guy said, with these bricks we'll rebuild Afghanistan. So,
Yeah.
I mean, this is the Palace Guard. They pulled these uniforms out of the mothballs, and were parading around in this. This was the governor's palace in Jalalabad, and they all had brand new sneakers, as you can see. And that's it. Any questions on that?
Now,
Were you ever threatened by Al-Qaeda?
It's I don't know. No, not really. I mean, not in the sense. No, I mean you were there, and we obviously the Taliban were just pulling all their turbans off, and they were there. But at that point, I think nobody knew what was happening and what was going on. So some people were. There were lots of dirty looks. I mean, there's no question about that. And you definitely, we all had bodyguards, and we always had somebody with a Kalashnikov with you at all times. But I certainly.
Were you
didn't
worried
want to
about
mark
that?
on it. Well, yeah. I mean, I was a little worried at times. Yeah, I think I know I experienced everything from sheer terror to exhilaration. There's no question about it. I mean, and those our fellow journalists were killed, and here we were. There's no newspapers, no radio, no television, no police, no government, no anything. You're just there, and it's a pretty frightening. Yeah, it's pretty frightening.
Did you have people that were helping you?
Not really. I mean, like I say, we had an interpreter and a fixer we brought from Pakistan. Yeah. The driver happened to have been Afghani, and it was his first time home in years. And then we hired everybody hired a couple bodyguards, and that's what you did. Hired four-wheel drive, and that was.
I remember there were some pictures that were taken. I was thinking that you had taken them with an old camera.
Well, this is it. This is
those
Tim
were
Weiner.
Those were just they were spectacular.
Well, and the Taliban doesn't. It's against Islam to reproduce your image, but they would allow little passport mugs, and so they had these big wooden cameras, and I don't know if there were boxes with an old Kodak lens on it, and they put a red window on it and a tray developer and fixer inside the camera, and it was paper negatives. And I'd seen these in Pakistan and in Cuba, so they show up in third world countries a lot, and they're fascinating because you take the picture, and they're very, very primitive. It's a 150-year-old technology, but making somebody sit there for 6 seconds or as long as 30 seconds, depending on how dark it was, it's an entirely different experience. I mean, you really see into their soul. They react completely different,
Yeah.
And so, they told us their stories, and this fellow lost a couple of his children in the bombing, and it was quite dramatic. And so I just thought it was such a primitive society at the time. I thought it was the best way to tell the story was with their technology. So I rented the camera once in Pakistan, and then I rented it in Afghanistan. We got into Jalalabad. There were a couple of them on the roof, and they hadn't used them in years because of the Taliban. So we rented one, and an assistant, and I made these pictures with it. It's actually very easy. There's nothing to it. You put a cap in front of the lens, you count to 5, 6, or whatever, and then you look in a peephole, and there's this long pant leg. You stick your arm up there, and you just process it. And the red light coming in through the glass, the daylight coming in through the red glass serves as a safe light. So you can pull the negative just as when you want it, the density, fix it. And then I took it back to my hotel, and I used my digital, stuck it up on the glass, and reshot it, reversed it in Photoshop, and sent it back to New York by satellite phone. And they ran a page of them in the paper.
And the interviews that were with them.
Very dramatic. I wish I had them with me.
Just
but
terrific.
They were so sad when you hear the stories that the children tell. These are rag pickers, and they make their living just finding bits of cloth and these poor children. And every one of them had an amazing story.
Yeah. And they seemed optimistic.
They seemed optimistic. Yeah, I think I mean, they were. I mean, like a lot of people were happy to see people from the West. I mean, there was one guy, I don't have him here, shaved his beard off. And believe me, what happened, one guy, they were shaving their beards off. One guy he was pulled off a bus by some Taliban fellows, same road where those journalists were killed, and they cut off his nose and his ears because he'd shaved his beard. So, and this was a shoe shine boy named.
Yeah.
This was another little rag picker. She actually picked little pieces of plastic is what she did. Of course, you're not allowed to photograph women in there unless they're young girls. So. He was a carpenter, this guy.
Did you do the interviews?
No, Tim Weiner was there, and we had an interpreter. So, but we had huge crowds would gather around, and this was a fruit picker. And at first they all wanted to help. They all wanted to hold up the background. I used some black cloth as the background, and everybody wanted to help. But then the crowds would get huge, and then some guy declared he was going to police the situation. Started whipping people. So 3 times we had to break everything down and move, leave for a while, and come back just to do about 15 interviews. I mean, that was it. I mean, it would just. I mean, people just had never seen anything. Hadn't seen anything like that in years.
One of the things that made it particularly dramatic was that the Times was running all of the stories of people from September 11th. And so every day you had those. And so they were, I thought, very good in relation to that, of what was happening there and what people were thinking.
Well, that's interesting, because this guy, had been known in his village for his mustache, and as soon as the Taliban disappeared, he shaved his beard off so he could have his mustache again. This guy had a U.S. Army jacket on. I don't know where he got that. But you can see that it was paper negatives. They were very primitive, but it had its own beauty. And this is my last thing here. This is 2 years after at Ground Zero, and they asked me to just go, and I had never been to Ground Zero, and so it was just a quick walk around and impression. I actually walked around twice, to be honest. And the center picture is all that's left of the building, and to me, I saw gaping faces looking down into the hole at the top there, and the only humanity is the colors of the different parking levels. And then everywhere you look, you see little reminders, of what had been around. These are just the buildings that on the perimeter of the hole, and you can see like the icon of the knives in the top picture there, and the space in that picture is where the towers had been. So, and that's it. That's all I brought.
That's terrific. Oh, those are terrific.
So, any questions? And who's doing what? Everybody's going into political science. How many are coming to Washington, or are you actually in Towson? So.
Do you plan on going to Iraq?
You know what? I don't think so. It upsets everybody in my family, and frankly, I just turned 53, and that's a tough. It's tough. It really is. I mean, I think I've been a handful of conflicts over my career, and I think Iraq is. I think my last one. I spent 6 weeks in the Gulf right before the war started, and it was fascinating. But I just thought maybe not stick to politics. That's exciting too. So,
what did you think of the embedding program?
Well, I personally didn't think it was a bad idea. I mean, especially after running around Afghanistan, I would have happily embedded with anybody's. So it's you know, you just have to, it's any different than sitting in the White House briefing room. You have to maintain your neutrality, and that's hard. You've got to keep an arm's length distance from everybody you cover. I mean, you know, some of these folks on Capitol Hill, they want to, you know, invite you to their homes and whatever. You know, some of them are very friendly, and you know, you just have to. You never know. You could be sitting there at a committee hearing, and they're testifying for their reputations, for God's sake. So you know. So I didn't find the embedded thing that, you know, I think most people of our colleagues know how to, you know, maintain their good judgment. What did you think about it?
I thought it was good. It was
Any
positive.
opinions there? What did you guys think of it?
Yeah.
You thought it was a good idea?
Now, how many people have been in Iraq?
Just me, I guess.
Who's me? What circumstances were you there? The military?
Oh, yeah, I was with Marine Infantry in Iraq.
Well-
I was a automatic rifleman.
What outfit were you with?
I was with 2nd Battalion, 6th Marines, Docks Company.
Oh, yeah.
Did you have any reporters embedded with you?
No, we did not. I had very extensive contact with the media while I was over there. We only came across them, I want to say, at a maximum of 3 different times, and that was only just for a matter of maybe an hour or so.
What do you think of the coverage these days?
I don't think too highly of it.
Well, I think most people in the military agree with you. So
What do you think's missing?
I wouldn't necessarily say that the media is completely biased and they want to make the war look bad, but basically it's just the nature of the beast. I mean, people want to see shock and awe, and you know, you're not gonna get a front cover story if you write an article about how they're rebuilding a school or turning the power back on, you know. But if you have a picture of a car bomb or something, it's more powerful journalism. So that's what you're going to see coming out there.
Yeah, it's hard for me to comment on that. I know that when we were in Afghanistan, I mean, it was obviously it was different. It was so, you know, we were clueless. There was nobody to brief you in the morning. You had no idea what was going on, and I think we did our best with this little incremental, story by story, showing how it was, you know, opening up a radio station, and you know how the NGOs were coming back, and they were trying to show that we tried to show that and get the people's story in that. But you're right. I think that a lot of people feel the same way you do, and I read a lot of online blogs and that, and so it's pretty. Yeah, the feeling's pretty strong out there. I don't know how we can. Far be it from me to criticize because I'm not there, but I think Iraq's really tough, and it's hard to get. Frankly, I think it's hard to get experienced people out there for a lot of news organizations. It's expensive, it's dangerous, and you know. And what about political coverage? What do you all think about that?
What kind of coverage?
When you just see coverage of the White House, coverage of Congress, coverage of the elections.
I think for the most part it was pretty good.
Well, good. Could you tell my boss that? Given the midterms coming up.
Especially the pictures, right?
Yeah.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
How do you see your role as a photographer? I mean, when you're snapping these pictures, are you thinking creative or artistic? Are you thinking this is substantive in terms of it being substantive politically, or for people who may not have the opportunity to go to Afghanistan and Iraq and these places? I mean, what do you see your role in terms of the big picture?
Well, number one, to do substance and to be as accurate and fair as you can possibly be, above all. If I can do that in a creatively, all the best. You know, I mean, I want people I want to draw people to the stories. You know, and pictures do that. You know, remind reporters a good picture will keep you off of a shelf and out of a gutter, which is, you know, it gives you better play with a good picture. So no, I think it's really important to be. I mean, it's you know, it's so easy to lie with photography. It's very easy, but but I think for the most part, people are pretty honest with what they do. But, but like I say, above all, substance, accuracy, fairness, that's the most important.
Don't you think that, that when covering a president, that with the amount of the number of pictures that you take, you really get a sense of who that person is? And that you're able to give that in a way that sometimes you can't get it in print.
Absolutely. I mean, I always remember the pictures of Martha Mitchell, and for some reason, every picture of her, it was so unfair. Every picture she had her mouth open. Remember back in those days?
Yeah, right.
Okay. Well, that's it's that's unfair. That's not accurate. You could.
She did give away a few secrets.
She did give away a few secrets, but it's. I'll grant you that, but still, I'm not sure what the motivation was behind that. Sometimes, I mean, it's the photographers. Sometimes they love to wait, position themselves. So I remember one time the Washington Post. Sometimes photographers will position themselves to make a public figure look ridiculous. It's a joke. There was a picture of George Bush, and there was some wings coming out of his head, and it looked like he was braying like a donkey. So, and it ran in a lot of newspapers in color, and I think that's that was a little unfair for a news story.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose if you want to put it in an opinions section, that's another thing. But in looking at the pictures of Bush, you can see the way in which he's aged. You can see the times that he's under stress. Because in the briefing room, from the podium, everything's fine. Right.
And there's no hint that the president is feeling stressed.
Absolutely, and it's unfortunate that we really don't have an accurate picture of what George Bush has been through for the last few years, and what he's really about. I mean, we see him just as, and that's frankly the only way we can cover him is the way they present him to us. That's it.
But you can still capture that.
I think, to a degree, but I'd still love to see what books he's got on his nightstand, and what he does when he walks through that colonnade back to the residence at 7 o'clock, and who's squeezing the grapefruits in the morning. I mean, I'd love to see some more. Like I say, during the campaign, the reporters never had the access that the photographers could occasionally get, and you really, suddenly, I mean, for some reason, politicians think you don't hear anything, so they'll say things that, like, where's my notepad, and they'll act in such a way that, I can just see it, it's great copy, and so you try to capture that in a picture, but sometimes it's their detriment, most of the time it would be to their benefit, but like I say, they're overmanaged, overstage managed, the president is, the candidates are, and it's hard to show what reality is, but at this point, I think if that's the way they want to present themselves, then let that be their record.
Recently, though, wouldn't you say in the last few months, the president has been putting himself in more vulnerable situations?
True, yeah. Well,
in his Q&As that he's had,
absolutely.
And that he walks away from the podium. He's not hugging the podium all the time.
Right. Back, it came more of a campaign style, right? Yeah, the truth. But I want to see more. I want to do another day in the life, and let's see what it's like 5 years after. So we'll see.
Any questions?
Presumably your photos are accompanied with stories. What type of relationship do you have with the reporters who are?
There's roughly 50 reporters in our bureau and only 2 photographers, and we use a few freelancers. And we work very little with the reporters. We just have to be on top of what's going on. And Doug Mills is my colleague, and we always have a sense of what's going on, what the story of the day is, or the stories, and we just go after them. And then, because if you wait in Washington, everything starts at 10 in the morning and ends at 3 in the afternoon. So you can't wait. You can't wait for a story list. You can't wait for meetings. You've got to get up and start moving right away. So. Unlike a reporter, we can't, we have to be there before it happens, and and we'll usually try to touch base once in a while, but very little interaction with the reporters. A little more on Capitol Hill, but pretty much work on our own.
What are the rhythms of your day like? I mean, when you get up, when do you get up and do you read newspapers? How do you fill yourself in on
Yeah,
what's going to go on?
I
in the
read
day?
2 or 3 news. First off, I'll stay up till the wee hours reading the internet because I love reading blogs and newspapers from all around the world. And then I'll get up in the morning, read the papers, try to get into work by 9 o'clock, and check the day book, which is the daily schedule we have in Washington that says such and such a hearing. Get the president's schedule usually about 9 o'clock at night, and you can run through that and see if there's something worth covering there. And we get our. I have an idea what the Times is working on. There's a Monday planning meeting I'll try to get to, and so it depends on the day. But generally out the door 8:30, and picking up my first camera at 9:30 or 10 o'clock, and shooting and transmitting all day nowadays. Just because of the web, we're trying to be a little. Like a live news crew, I guess.
How many pictures would you send?
Generally, on an assignment, I send about 5, on an average, about 5 pictures per assignment. So it's a very tight edit. Try to give them. We can pretty much anticipate what they need, how many pictures they're going to be able to run. So I give it something very tight. Our national editors are taking care of the entire country, so we try to. Digest everything in Washington for them so that they don't have to plow through hundreds of pictures and that. I like it that way.
How many different assignments do you have during a day?
The average probably 3 on the average, but it can be as many as 5. And it's busy. It's very busy in Washington. It's gotten a lot busier too.
When you're covering the president as a president, and you look at the schedule. What is an event, a type of event you like to see? Because you think you're going to be able, you might have some good opportunity.
Generally what's on their schedule doesn't offer much of an opportunity. It's when there's nothing on their schedule and he's there. That's when it might be interesting. There's going to be an announcement or nowadays a personnel change. So that's what I look for, the holes in his schedule. So Doug and I, what we'll do is one of us will take the White House for a week and the other the Hill, and then we'll just sort of fill in around town whatever we need or call them freelancers. And then we get out. I mean, 2 weeks ago I did the Volvo sailing race, and we get out and travel a lot. Doug went to the Olympics, and so we get out of Washington a bit too.
So you were on the boats?
I was.
Which one were you on?
The Erickson. Erickson. It was fun. And I love politics. I'm happy to do this, and I love having free time to go and work on my little art projects. And I always wait till close to a holiday when all the editors want 3 days off, and so there's always going to be a giant hole, and that's when you present them with a photo essay, and you can get it run. So they'll run anything, frankly. So, anyway, so is this your last class?
Yep.
Yes.
What year is this? Senior?
Well, they're variety. Is this your last class for your college career for any of you?
Yeah.
Well, congratulations. When's graduation?
2 weeks from today.
Oh, okay. Well, congratulations.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, thanks a lot. I actually teach at the Corcoran, and I've got to go there and give them their, this is my last night teaching them, so, and they graduate on Saturday. So thanks a lot. I hope